Great. All right, so am I recording? Yes, I am recording. Excellent. Those are great comments. I definitely want to get into, Ashley, some of your comments on multifamily and soft density by right. I think we have some ideas in the more detailed slides that might get into that a little bit. Before I move away from this page, though, I just want to take a quick straw poll. If we had to pick one or two, I mean, this is it's kind of a gimme, I think, because there's two that are broad citywide, how we do zoning tools, but that's my bias. So I guess, is there one priority? Are there two or three priorities? What should we be really focused on? What's the most essential for Charlottesville here? And is there anything that we should maybe not be talking about?
I don't think there's anything that needs to come off the list. I think maybe if I'm looking at this list, I think we have the ADU ordinance, so less work is needed there. There certainly could be ways that we might make it more accessible to the public and better utilized throughout the city, but it's nice that that's already in place, so we don't have as much work to do. So I wouldn't take it off the list, but it's just, we don't have to do as much to maybe boost that one. Inclusionary zoning might, I'd like to hear more about if you're thinking about changing the state policy.
No, but it's our understanding that the city has recently been added to the list of cities that
can
do a mandatory.
Out of the list.
That went into effect, I think, in July. So,
perfect.
Yeah. So that is actually an option that wasn't an option when we started this plan, which is fun.
That's great.
Well, let's talk about it in more detail then. This is a lot, so you don't have to read all of it, but you can. Ashley, you had mentioned shortening development processes, increasing efficiency. We're talking very much, I think, about that. We need to be sure that we're saying it in the right way. But the city should be revising its development review processes to limit discretionary control, and build towards a culture among city staff that encourages collaboration. We also want to talk about ensuring, changing the special use permit process to ensure that multifamily development is actually feasible, not just allowed, but allowed in a way that is feasible and doesn't require a special use permit. So that's kind of a key. It's not about the number of iterations of the process, but by reducing the number of approvals that a project needs, that does become a more efficient process. Is that the right mechanism? Are there other mechanisms we need to be talking about when we're talking about efficiency?
I think it's kind of a two-pronged thing, and sorry I'm talking so much, but I think some of it, you hit on it, like this working on collaborating to find the right solutions and to coming together in communication around projects, not being afraid to get staff and all the right players in the room to find those solutions and get through the process more quickly by communication. But then there's, I think, the more data driven side of review metrics and being willing to do the guided reviews that are quicker than the state 45 days, and maybe just looking at some other localities that run it a little bit more like a business and have quicker turnaround times, and figuring out how they do that after, usually the first go round is a longer time span, but after that it should be able to move pretty quickly.
Yeah. Are there thoughts that anybody has about how we can make these changes in a way that hopefully limits displacement from low-income neighborhoods?
I've been thinking a lot about that. I'd like to see something in terms of phasing, so that liberalization happens in some areas before others, so that things are sort of moving along a little bit further. And I don't know what that timing would look like. But that seems like one appropriate solution.
Phasing of not just changes to zoning, but changes to the SUP. Okay.
No idea if that's legal.
It's an interesting idea, worth looking into.
I don't think I understand what you mean, Lyle. Do you mind?
So I'm really thinking about Hartford, Connecticut here. The way that they rolled out phasing out parking restrictions was they removed it from certain commercial uses, then more commercial uses, then residential uses. Not just one big scary change. So businesses were able to adapt and people were able to adapt. It wasn't just a shock.
Yeah, and one thing I should say is, we're working on the housing plan, there's the comp plan update, there's the zoning code update. I think what we're aiming to do, and we're working with Code Studio pretty collaboratively on this, is to make recommendations about the principles of change that are needed, and then Code Studio is going to figure out the exact mechanism. So if it is things making tweaks to eliminate the special use permit requirement, they might have the right idea about how to do that mechanically in some areas or in a gradual way. Not to punt on that one, but not being a zoning expert myself, I think that's probably the approach that would make the most sense. I've pulled up a map here. This is a preliminary one way of thinking about it, not a recommendation, but one way of thinking about areas that might be good opportunities for multifamily zoning are those that are currently zoned for residential. Maybe we should be talking more about commercial areas. You guys can tell me that. These are areas that are within a quarter mile of transit corridors or within 1 mile of employment centers. We're also excluding parcels and block groups that are currently primarily low income, again, to try to remove that development pressure. Is that a useful way to think about areas that might be right for upzoning into multifamily? Are there other things that we should be thinking about when we think about places that are not currently zoned for multifamily that could become zoned for multifamily?
Sarah, I thought your comment about maybe looking at commercial districts as being, important, and I think the city has like a downtown district or city center zoning or some kind of like catch-all that, could either be brand new redevelopment or it could be some snake-filled auto graveyard lot, for example. So those to me seem like great infill opportunities for multifamily that probably meet some of these other criteria as well, but might be worth adding to the query and tweaking it and looking at it that way.
Great.
To go along with that comment, as you look at infill, you can also then look at the more city center it is, the higher the density of that multifamily by right.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else have thoughts on this? Okay, I want to make sure we have time to talk about some of the other tools, but I know this is a big one, so I just wanted to real quick. Are there any key implementation needs or barriers that you guys want to call out on this tool?
Sarah, sorry for being disjointed with my comment, but looking at the previous slide with the map, can you just clarify if one of those criteria was like proximity to a transit corridor or a transit stop? And I know that stops can be relocated over time, but I just wonder if there's a way to look at that differently.
I believe that was based on the corridors. Okay. That might not be the right way to go, but I'm pretty sure that that's what we used.
If you have data points for our transit stops, it would be interesting to look at that map compared to, within a certain radius or distance of the corridor. It just might be interesting to see the two and how those would, differ.
Sure.
Thanks.
Yeah, this just doesn't seem to give us a lot to work with. I think if we're talking about making these changes, and I mean, I like the thought on phasing changes in, but there's
Yeah.
a lot of areas of the city that might be considered, you know, a lot of areas are left in gray that might be.
Well, I should say that this map does not show areas that are currently allow multifamily, where we are also talking about making changes to increase the multifamily.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think that map would look very different.
Yes.
Okay.
This is just single family areas that might be candidates for upzoning if we want to talk about that. All right, I'm gonna move on and talk about soft density. I'm sorry, Ashley, earlier you mentioned something about lot sizes, and I apologize because the recommendations are not on the same page as the discussion questions here. So, you know, we're talking about identifying single family neighborhoods that might be suitable for soft density, and that should increase the availability of housing in those neighborhoods, particularly neighborhoods that have historically been segregated, and that in addition to allowing more types of housing, we should consider opportunities to reduce minimum lot sizes and make other changes that support the development of smaller and more affordable housing options. So I'm hearing that that needs to happen not just in the zoning code, but in this subdivision ordinance. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. The subdivision ordinance has lot size minimums that are in many cases, you know, bigger than they might need to be, and lot requirements and restrictions that might make it impossible right now if you wanted to do a cottage cluster. There's just a lot of it's not in place right now in the ordinance. So I think there's a lot of changes that could happen there that might encourage that in the middle.
Okay. Anybody else have thoughts on that? One question I wanted to ask, you know, missing middle or soft density housing means a lot of different things. We've got this graphic, I don't know how legible it is. You know, typically in a single family neighborhood, when we're talking about missing middle or soft density, we're talking about townhomes and duplexes, maybe a triplex or a fourplex. There's a lot more in here that gets a little bit more dense and probably isn't as suitable for single family neighborhoods. But I'm curious if people have thoughts about the types of housing that should be allowed if we're allowing soft density. Should we be putting bounds on that at this point? Should we just be focusing on 2 to 4 units?
I don't know. I mean, I think that the issue with all of this, like when you start messing with the single family neighborhoods, there's going to be a lot of fear and resistance to. I'd say we do need to think about it strategically. And I don't know if there's any type of analysis saying, hey, if we went all the way up to the townhouse, but leaving out like that multiplex and live work, like is all those suitable, or do we stop at the bungalow court? But yeah, I think ways like Lyle was saying, how do you work it in there without creating total fear and pandemonium?
Yeah, I definitely appreciate thoughts people have about that sort of political feasibility and how we bring that to the public, how we can explain this in a way that makes a good case, and two, how we can be thinking about limiting displacement, because this is the tool I think where we're still really grappling with it. You know, is it better to just do blanket changes across the whole city, or should we be focusing on areas that are, you know, higher income or historically redlined? Like, what do you guys have thoughts about that?
My sense is that this is less destructive from a displacement perspective than, you know, large multifamily.
Mm-hmm.
Just the economic pressure is not the same. Though, you know, fact check that. I don't know if that's, you know, I haven't done my homework on that. So I'm less concerned about that with this tool.
have a couple of maps here. We did a map by race of the city's population, just to kind of look at where some of those historically segregated or currently segregated neighborhoods might be. I'm sure none of this is new to the folks on the call. Is this a helpful way to think about places where we might talk about additional single family density? And alternatively, we have something based more on income, and just curious, how do you think about this, and how should we be thinking about it?
You might want to also look at the single family areas and see which of them have the larger lot sizes, and that may correlate with your previous map or not. But in those areas, there's probably more opportunity for infill if the larger lot sizes are already there.
Okay, that's interesting. What about, I mean, do people think about, is this something that we should just be doing the same treatment citywide, or should we be talking about target areas? Or to Lyle's point earlier, is there maybe an opportunity to pilot it in a few neighborhoods and then expand?
I just think this is going to be the hardest one. Like, I'm excited about this tool, but I think it's going to be very, very challenging. So, I mean, we may need more time to think about that question. And I see it being very, very challenging. So if there is a way that we can, like you said, pilot it, without too scary. I don't know how that plays out, but whichever area you pick, I think people are gonna freak out over it.
Yeah, I'm trying to digest that. Like, so the criteria is when we look at this map, like, so for instance, I think it's not my neighborhood, but I think is that North Charlottesville, North Main, whatever they, it's the area in this, I'm pointing on my screen. I realize you can't see my screen. The blob just above downtown. Not that one, the other blob. Yeah, that blob. So
Locust?
Huh?
Martha, is that? I think it's Martha Jeff.
No, Martha Jeff is further on the other side of Locust. And so I think that's North Main. I think whatever it's called, it's north something. And
it's
so
in between Park and Locust, that blob, right?
Is that between Park and Locust? Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
just north of the bypass.
yeah. Okay, whatever it is.
Sorry, we don't have better labels on here.
Yeah, whatever that is, the criteria for this, if someone lives in that neighborhood and says, okay, I'm being identified as a soft density opportunity district because I lack diversity, is that the driving criteria?
Yes, it's a single family neighborhood. And that's what this, again, this is one way of thinking about this, and we're not saying this is the way. So please push back if you think this is not the right way.
No,
but yes, this is based on areas that are low diversity and that are not low income.
And so because this neighborhood is low diversity and mid income, they're going to be rezoned for soft density opportunities. I think that's a very, very difficult message to sell.
Do you think it's an easier message to sell if you say this is something that we're doing in neighborhoods around the city?
I don't know. I'm just wondering. I'm just thinking that, the ADUs are going to be an easier thing to sell for infill than an existing neighborhood that is what it is, and it's being targeted for infill opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that it's not going to make single family development non-compliant, right? Single family housing is still allowed by right in these neighborhoods, and we're not encouraging anyone to redevelop their houses or demolish neighborhoods. This is just saying, as there are opportunities to support infill development in these neighborhoods, there are more options for what can get built. Similar to ADUs, where you're within the context of an existing neighborhood adding units. This is just saying within the context of an existing neighborhood, if I want to tear down my house and build a new one, I can tear down my house and build a duplex instead.
Yeah, and I think your additional narrative right there will be helpful. And I think you're going to have to be very, very, I don't know that this can be presented in any shorthand.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
Very explained for people to be comfortable with it. I think that if people walk into a public meeting and see that blob on their neighborhood and they see, this, it's like, whoa.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, and I would step in, I agree with everything that Diane just said, but even the language of areas of opportunity might piss people off.
Yeah. It looks like you're hunting for infill opportunities, and they're
and you're only providing that opportunity to areas that aren't diverse. So what if I'm a property owner in a different part of the city that is more diverse, and you're not allowing me that opportunity to increase my wealth by providing more units on my lot? It's just a very tricky situation. So you're either maybe in like a pilot situation somewhere, or you're more like the ADUs where it's just across the board, but that doesn't mean that people will exercise it everywhere. Sure. No, it's very, very challenging.
Okay.
And maybe the criteria, and that's why I asked earlier, what is the criteria? Maybe the criteria needs to be a bit broader. It's diversity, and that there are it's proximity. I think it needs to be a collection of criteria that is more digestible, makes more sense. That people can hang on to other things besides diversity.
Okay. We have about a half an hour left, and I want to give us time to talk about other topics. Is there anything else that people want to say on any of these land use recommendations?
I had one more comment. I sent Jenny the work that Kurt Kiesecker did during the comp plan as the Planning Commission was working on it. And he had a lot of diagrams of areas in the city. Like, it was basically a diagram showing areas where we could have, I guess, new mixed use centers and transportation opportunities. It was kind of when you go back to some of your previous maps, there's a lot of gray area when you were analyzing the transportation and those neighborhoods that were near, I guess, being transit stops. And so that points out this other interrelated issue of not having these mixed use centers throughout the city that are both walkable and creating kind of it's thinking about it more in terms of like the diversity of like mixed use opportunities. But I think I'm bringing it up because I think it could also play into the decision of housing types and housing density. If you have these nodes of versus areas of opportunity. So thinking about the city in terms of nodes and where new nodes might be and how maybe the density kind of pans out in those nodes. And so I just wanted to make sure that you had access to that information, Sarah, and it might be helpful in a future conversation to look at those maps as well as we're thinking about these
Yeah,
decisions.
definitely. Thank
I
you.
would agree. I think the question earlier about, aren't there other areas? And you said, yes, we're only looking at the potentials, not the existing. I think to give it context and comprehend, sort of a comprehensive view of what you're doing and how it fits into other things, even if they're screened back, you're just highlighting your area in blue, but it's being shown as how it's integrated into other thoughts. It's not just I realize you have to deal with topic by topic by topic, but I think integration is how it's integrated
Yes.
is really important.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Sarah, on ADUs, I might take a little bit different approach than Ashley did with it, thinking that it is an area we should prioritize because it's not going to get the big numbers that we need. I mean, we know that, but there are very little changes that need to be made with it. The city has an ongoing relationship with the coalition out of Portland State that could help, move us in the right direction. I think it would build some goodwill among the community to see some early wins.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of those early wins that we could do without a lot of work. Is it going to solve our problem? No way. But it is a quick win that I think we could check off early.
Yeah, okay. Point well taken.
Frankly, we were trying to get that done before this to not waste our time.
So maybe not quite as quick a win as it could have been.
I also, and I think that's totally right, Chip. I would also, the fact that you've had movement at the state level on the inclusionary zoning, that should make that easier to pair it with this multifamily. If there's a way you can pair it with the multifamily changes, I don't know if that still can only be for special use permits. I haven't seen the info on that, but if there's a way that can just go into play for all multifamily, then you're simplifying the process. It's a known what to expect with every development, and you don't have this push and pull anymore. It just is what it is, and I think it takes a lot of the fear and loathing out of that process, because you can just make the code say what you're allowed to do and you get the units automatically.
Yeah, okay. I want to make sure we have time to talk about some other things. We've talked about land use. Is there another subject here that people want to jump to? Have a nomination?
I've got a couple of comments on governance.
Okay. You want to, well, let's go talk about governance. There's only a few in there, and maybe we'll have time to do another topic after that.
Mine's just quick. Get to governance. I guess one of the things, and of course, as those of you who know me, I've got to be wearing my regional hat. And while, the regional approach is one of the guiding principles, I don't see a lot of that mentioned or even referenced in some of the recommendations and different things. And so under in the purpose under governance, there's an area for including and empowering community voices.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that under the recommendations, that make sure I'm in the right place. I'm trying to get off of my notes. Just that there's a place for regional stakeholders in addition to the organizational committees that are already in place in the city, so that advice and direction can be given, and an opportunity for stakeholders across the board can talk about opportunities and entrepreneurial type of benefits that could be cross-jurisdictional. And I can type that up and send it to you, but I think that would be an addition to the recommendations that could be made.
Yeah, please do. So we can talk about, there's some more detail kind of as with land use on each of the two kind of governance bodies that we're talking about. But we're advising, and definitely interested to hear this group's feedback, a modified housing advisory committee that's reduced to about 10 to 15 members. And we are recommending expanding regional representation, as well as representation of community members, and really refocusing that housing advisory committee on its stated purpose of providing City Council with recommendations about policy and funding priorities. And we want to give regional representatives voting power on the HAC as well. So I'm curious if that meets what you're talking about, or if you think we need to be going further.
I think you have to be going further. I like that very much. You know, that's a more formal group. But I think something that has to bring a more diverse group to the table. And it may be a way of utilizing the existing regional housing partnership. And it could be a smaller group of that. But what we found, when you really try to get the voices that we believe need to be in this type of conversation, you pass 10 or 12 people really quickly. It takes a lot of people around it. And it doesn't need to really have formal powers of any kind. It's
just having a conversation and a forum for that.
And giving the opportunity, I think, to bring public and private sector together with the community members to talk about, you know, the what ifs. Mm-hmm. and just creating that environment to talk.
So what I'm hearing is we need to create a fourth governance recommendation that emphasizes expanding the city's participation or bringing some of these priorities into the regional housing partnership in order to talk about opportunities to jointly pursue some of these priorities. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly.
Great. Does anybody want to talk about any of these particular recommendations or go through this in any, is there anything that's unclear about what we're trying to do in this governance section, or anything that raises any alarm bells or concerns?
I can tell you as the vice chair of the HAC that every time people talk about reformatting the HAC, everybody freaks out.
Yeah. Sensitive to that concern. I would appreciate any thoughts you have about the recommendations that we're starting to talk about and how we can, we you know, fundamentally the HAC does great work, right? But we also want to make sure that we're setting the HAC up to be collaborative with all of the other, you know, city staff, with city leadership, and that it aligns in some ways with some of the funding, the conversations that the funding people are talking about, which is really about sort of transparency, clarity, and consistency in the way that funding gets appropriated. And so part of that's going to mean necessarily kind of dialing back the control that the HAC has in order to let the city have that and establish a consistent and transparent process. So I guess I'm curious if you have any thoughts about, are we on the right track in some of the changes that we're recommending? And what are the ways that we can ruffle as few feathers as possible, recognizing that we're going to have to ruffle some feathers?
Broadly, I support the idea of separating funding and advising. I think those are two different functions and should have two different groups of people. That makes sense to me. I don't have any ideas about specific membership, which is funny because I'm half the membership committee. But in general, I support having fewer people if there's an effective way to do that. And I haven't found one yet.
Okay.
I don't have specific comments, but just wanted to circle back to what Chip was mentioning and just say I enthusiastically support regionalism, you know, as an important lens to tackle this housing crisis. And yeah, just want to emphasize how important that is, not just at this sort of like strategic tactical level with specific recommendations, but like almost culturally or at a higher conceptual level, like really somehow trying to emphasize that through this plan, that although the plan is specific to the city, we are a region, our economy is regional, our infrastructure is regional. So just wanted to emphasize that.
Great, yeah, absolutely. I had a question and it went completely out of my head. To talk about these changes in a slightly different way, who needs to be the champion, or who can lead the charge in making some of these changes to governance that we're talking about?
I mean, council.
Okay. And obviously this is something that can't happen overnight. Do we have thoughts about whether it's an incremental approach, as we talked about with land use, or something else? Like what kind of time frame should we be shooting for to make some of these changes?
This is a perfect time to change the CAF because we have no money this year and we have no money next year. So there's not a lot to talk about.
Right.
Giving that a fresh start makes perfect sense when we eventually have money to talk about. For the rest, I would suggest incremental.
Yeah. Okay.
I do think the regional concept, though, could be done very quickly.
Right, because that structure already exists.
Yes.
That's great. That's fantastic. Okay. We have some more time, and we can talk about another topic if you want to. We can talk about governance some more. I'm really excited about this section, so happy to keep talking about it. Before we do that, we need to pick somebody to kind of report out some either key priorities and key discussion points when we go back. Does anybody want to volunteer to do that? Okay, I'm gonna roll a die then. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. Tim, short straw. Do you think you can? So I would ask that when we go back to the full group that you could report out on just some of the key tools that we talked about, which are the key points that we covered for basically multifamily by right, ADUs, soft density, and regional governance.
Well, at the expense of embarrassing myself, I had to step out for several chunks of this breakout group while also doing parenting,
Understood.
/ conflict resolution, / boxing refereeing. If there's anybody who'd be willing to speak in a more, I don't know, cohesive way, I would really appreciate it.
Well, maybe Ashley could talk about the land use stuff that we talked about, and Chip, you could weigh in on the governance piece, because you had, I think, some good thoughts there. Does that work?
Glad to.
Fine.
Cool. We've got like 5 minutes, so it's like 3 minutes and 2 minutes. You'll be fine.
If somebody will get it started.
Well, we have about 15 minutes left. What do you guys want to do with our time?
Do we have time for me to make a subsidy?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Under your subsidy recommendations, and I know that normally down payment assistance and home buyer counseling is merged at the hip, and that's one joint strategy. But I would consider separating that out because of, again, opening up an opportunity for regional support where payment assistance could be something localized to the city of Charlottesville, but a partnership on a regional basis for home buyer, and I would also throw in homeowner counseling. It's one thing to be able to buy it, but it's another thing to be able to hold on to it for 20 years. But which could easily, I think a recommendation would be for the city to support a regional approach to home buyer counseling and home ownership counseling.
Okay.
And that would be separate from the down payment assistance program.
That's a good point, and I will say actually we've sort of decoupled the counseling from the down payment assistance. So I think that's a good point and something we should consider. We're talking about down payment assistance as a form of shared equity ownership, which is similar to what the Community Land Trust is doing. The goal here is really to support permanent, affordable homeownership through shared equity, so that the down payment assistance remains with the property and transfers to the next household if they're income eligible. So that's sort of a shift in thinking about down payment assistance, and we've sort of de-emphasized counseling in order to talk more about this shared equity idea. But I hear you on counseling and supporting homeowners and home buyers being very important. Is that something that you would consider to be a priority tool, or something that's just an important part of a broader funding prioritization?
Well, I guess for me, it would be priority because it allows another opportunity to create a regional project together.
Okay.
And I do think that if the city were to have a home buyer, homeowner, and Albemarle County had a same mirror program, you're really duplicating a lot of services that could be done under one roof instead.
Okay. Great. In looking at these, and I know there's a lot of recommendations, but are there any here that are either unclear or obvious priorities? Yeah, go ahead. I think you're muted, maybe. Try it now. Okay, I think now I can hear you. I don't know what was going on there. Oh, no. See, I could hear you breathe, and now I can't hear you talk. Okay. Anybody else have thoughts on priorities within the subsidy tools that we're talking about? Or any of these unclear? I know the down payment assistance one we just kind of covered very briefly.
Sarah, I would just say I appreciate you breaking out the land bank and the land trust model. Too often, I think people mix those up.
Yes, we found that exactly, and that's why you don't see the words land trust on here. It's
Good.
Shared equity. Yeah.
That is exactly what I was looking for. Thank you.
Shared equity homeownership is now it's what the Community Land Trust does. We're thinking more broadly than the land trust as an entity and organization.
So something we haven't talked about, but on the Planning Commission we talk about all the time, is off-street parking requirements. How are we thinking about that?
Off-street parking in residential neighborhoods around ADUs specifically, or?
The whole wonderful world of off-street parking requirements.
That is a good question. It's something that we haven't gotten into in detail. I think we need to note that it's a concern. Again, I will probably punt the specifics of how to make it work to my friends at Code Studio, but I think you're right that is, I think actually, let me make sure that I think we have actually mentioned, we haven't called it out specifically. We say opportunities to reduce minimum lot sizes and make other changes that support So, okay, off-street parking, adding it to the list.
It's a very big other change.
Yeah. And I think we have this something similar with the accessory dwelling units.
It hits every item.
Yeah. Easing parking and setback requirements we have here. Okay.
Sarah, would it be possible to get from you or from someone else in this group the inclusionary zoning changes, the laws?
Yeah, so I will say, I think we're going to send this draft around to everybody following the meeting with the more detailed slides, but we have some time now, so and we can talk about inclusionary zoning. This is, I mean, we're not going into a great level of detail here, but basically saying what I said earlier, which is that in order for inclusionary zoning to work, you need multifamily to be working properly. The city now has the opportunity to enact inclusionary zoning. And so basically, when there is a strong multifamily market in Charlottesville, there's the opportunity to develop an inclusionary zoning policy in order to increase the provision of affordable rental units as a portion of new development. That's about the level of detail that we're going into at this point. We're actually helping other communities in Virginia currently to review and develop inclusionary zoning policies, but we're not getting into a great level of detail at this point, just because we're not really getting into the policy design specifically, and it's not like there's an existing policy that we can start to tweak to make sure that we're being specific about what's needed. I don't know, does that feel appropriate to you? Is there more information that you think would be important to bring in?
I just wanted to see the actual documentation of what we have versus what Albemarle has available, so we can, I think this is appropriate for this level of a document, but just so we're already looking into the future on how we get that in play as soon as possible, because that's a really important one.
Yeah. And we have a like explainer on how inclusionary zoning works back here as well.
Another major issue that we ran into in the 2018 comprehensive planning process is heights. Right now we've sort of said, well, 35 is a good number. Why not make it 35 everywhere? Everybody likes that number. But we do need something a little bit more considered.
Yeah.
That is a little bit more context sensitive to where the things are. Relations to street, parks,
Yeah, absolutely.
other things. Land use.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Heights are important.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I think if everybody wants to take a 5-minute break, I'm happy to stay here and keep talking to you about recommendations, but I thank you so much for all of your input. Yeah, if you want to take a 5-minute break, take a 5-minute break. Otherwise, let me know what you want to talk about and we'll talk about it.
I always want to talk about land value tax. It's not legal in Virginia. Well, it's legal in like 2 places in Virginia. Could be legal here if we asked, but we've never asked.
We have not gotten into that one yet.
It's a whole world.
Yes. There's, I think, a lot of the advocacy is living in the tenants' rights space, so we haven't been talking, because there are so many other tools already available to the city in some of these other categories. We've been focusing on sort of what's already available or what's already in place and how we can tweak it to make it better. Definitely hear you that there are some other things that need to be enabled as well. So.
What is that? It's land value tax? What is that?
I've already given you this speech, Diane Dale. Land value tax, it's okay, it was years ago. The idea is that you pay the same price whether you build or not. So if you're just sitting on an empty lot, you pay X. You build, a whole bunch of multifamily, you pay the same number. Doesn't matter, doesn't change behavior. Right now, if you build, you pay. If you don't build, you don't pay.
Oh, I thought it might be something else. What I don't know, what I mostly am doing most of my volunteer work in social services issues right now, and education and lack of things. And so I wish we could have some form of a rated tax, you know, to really be able to, since our schools are funded by real estate tax, a way to, what's it called when it's a graduated, or like the federal tax, the more money you make, the higher your percentage. You know, if we had a tax where at certain levels of land value, the rates would go up so that we could actually fund our schools.
Graduated land value tax.
Thank you. Is that what it's called? Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah. Is that what it's called? Graduated land value? Or did you just, okay. And so what's the status of this in our state for that?
You have to ask Pretty Please. I think Alexandria and Roanoke have. Yeah, Old Town.
Old Town Alexandria has that?
Yep, they haven't instituted. They just asked for it, and then they sat on it.
Well, I think yeah, because I think that you know, the integration of I mean, it's a word I use all the time, but the integration of land use issues as they support social structure. You know, I think we have to be thinking more integratively about these issues, and so that's why I was reacting to like sort of just the one issue blob on a map. I think that's going to be really hard for people to digest.
Mm-hmm.
I thought the issue of parking, as you said, it drives everything. As soon as you start to talk about infill and density, people can't park now.
And Diane, I want to thank you for bringing up the comments that you already brought up on the maps. And I just want to reiterate again, those were maps that were meant to drive discussion here today with this group, and they're not maps that are actually part of the recommendations at this point.
Yeah.
But very much appreciate your comments and feedback on the ways in which, if we're going to include maps in the final plan, we need to change them. So, but yeah, those were not part of the recommendations. They were just sort of a starting point for conversation.
Yeah, because you know, everybody shows up at a meeting and goes right to the map and points to their house.
Yep.
Is my mic working yet?
Yay!
Hey, cool. Okay. I don't know what happened. That wasn't just a ploy to get out of speaking to the bigger group. I didn't change any settings, but my fan was spinning like crazy. Well, gosh, I don't know. I was going to say, I put my thought that the moment passed, but I put that thought in the chat box. And that was just that, you know, the property tax relief program would seemingly be easier to implement than some of the other tools that might be more complex or new to the city, or perhaps more controversial. But also it would directly respond to some of the like concerns and comments I've heard from neighbors multiple times, which is that the steadily rising property tax increases are just a financial problem and also a source of stress and anxiety and frustration. And so it seems like by increasing some of the numbers in that policy, or by decreasing the threshold, or expanding the amount of funding that goes into that subsidy, those seem like just minor recalibrations with funding consequences, yes, but it seems like it could be really worth prioritizing, you know, depending on what others think and how others feel. But just wanted to share that.
Great, thank you.
Well, even this graduated land value tax, as it might get redirected, not just into education, but also into such things as subsidies, you know, to sort of balance out the, obviously balance out, yeah.
All right, well, I think we're going to get called back into the main group in a minute, but I want to thank you all again for your helpful input.